Okay, so next problem. So data from the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is a common measure of the overall worth of the entire stock market in the US, is graphed here from its start or early days of 1928 up through 2010. And, you know, money, there's inflation has happened since then. And so money is worth less than it used to be, or things cost more. You can think about it either way. So the numbers up here look really high, and you can't even see the changes down here because the new numbers are so much bigger. That line looks almost flat right there. If we zoomed in on that, we would find that's quite jagged in there. But we don't have a zoom on this because it's just a picture of a graph, not a real graph. It's regraphed below using a logarithmic scale. So notice here I have 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 in the top graph. They're all equally spaced by 2,000. In the bottom graph, notice there's a big jump from 0 to 2,000, and then 4,000, 6,000, 8,000. They kind of get closer together there. So here we're graphing powers of 10. So the vertical scale is what's called a logarithmic scale. It's the same data, we're just plotting the power of 10 instead of the actual number. But that lets us zoom in on the early days, which is kind of nice. So we can get a better feel for what was happening in the early days. Now these two graphs are going to help us determine some information, but we're going to make some calculations first. So in this last paragraph of the intro here, we're given information about a drop that happened in 1929 and a drop that happened in 2008. And some of you might not remember this, but in 2008, there was a housing market crash that took down the whole stock exchange, and a whole bunch of banks failed in 2008. So it was a huge drop from 14,000 to 7,000 roughly. So what we want to do here is we want to calculate the absolute change for 1929. So what was the actual drop from 380 to 42? That's the absolute change. And we need to change that to a relative change. So I'm just going to remind you about how to do that. If you remember, feel free to move along. So absolute change is equal to the new amount minus the old amount. So for example, for 1928, they told me it dropped from 380 to 42. So 380 is the old amount, 42 is the new amount it dropped to. So that would be 42 minus 280. That's absolute change. Subtract the two numbers in the right order. Relative change is a percent change, as we call it sometimes also. Relative change is the absolute change. I can't spell absolute, that's better. Divided by the old amount, whatever that was. So we have to find this difference right here, and then take that difference and divide by the old amount, which was was it 280 or 380? Did I write that wrong? It is 380. I miswrote that. So what is 42 minus 380? I get a drop of 338. And then to get the relative change, we take that absolute change and divide by the old amount, which was the 380. And so I get around 88.9%. If I went to the nearest tenth of a percent, oops, wrong place. Which is a drop of about 88.9%. So that's a pretty big percent drop. The stocks dropped by almost 90%. It was catastrophic. Now, a note on the way the answers are asked for. We're looking for the size of the drop, so give your answers as positive values. Make sure you read the fine print. So for 1929, I would just say, hey, it dropped by 338, and the relative change to one decimal place. I missed that part. 338 isn't a one decimal place. As a percentage, yeah, that would be 88.9. That's all I got for that one. So I'm going to let you do the 2008 one, see what you get. Feel free to jump into the chat with any questions or answers to share. All right, what do we got in the chat? It looks like we have a drop of about 46.8%. And let's see, what did I get there? I would agree with that. And they said to go to the nearest 10th, so we would just go 46.8. So I think this one also, I agree, 46.8. And this absolute change was 6,600, right? So that's a pretty big absolute change, but based on what money was worth in 2008, it was only a 47% drop. Now I say only a 47% drop, that's huge, but it's not nearly as big as an almost 90% drop, okay? So in 2008, there was a bigger absolute change, but in 1929, that was a bigger relative change. So that means like if I had all my money invested in the Dow Jones, I just lost 90% of everything I had. Imagine that, right? If I was a millionaire, I now have 10% of a million, which is a lot for some people, but not for a millionaire, right? So they would have a hard time paying their bills on 10% of what they used to have. So there were lots of suicides in 1929 when the stock market crashed due to the amount of money people lost in a day. Now, let's think about this next part, and I'm going to copy these into my graph to try and estimate this for the next two questions. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of areas on my graph here. So 2008, that's this drop right here. And I can also see it again in this picture right here, 2008 drop. 1929 drop is right near the beginning here. And that's this drop right here we're looking at. Okay. This graph up here is showing us absolute change. And because we only have the powers down here, we're looking at relative changes over here. And so the next two questions are, well, which graph better shows the absolute change changes, which graph better shows the relative changes. And I think once you look at the pictures, you can pretty much see what's happening there. So in the top graph, this big jump here is that drop of 6,600, and I can hardly see the drop of 338 in 1928, 1929. However, in 1929, there was a 90% drop. And in 2008, it was only a 47% drop. So this is the 47% drop. This is the almost 90% drop over there. So the logarithmic scale allows me to better see the relative changes that are going on there, those percent changes. Any questions? And we are hopefully done with our lesson.